The late afternoon sun stretched across Main Street as William Patterson tightened the straps on his worn tool belt. His calloused hands, hardened from years of carpentry and odd jobs, moved with practiced ease as he gathered supplies from Grayson's general store. Money was tight, it always was, but he still allowed himself one small indulgence, a bag of candy for his son, Jackson, who had earned it with perfect school attendance. Martha Grayson smiled warmly as she rang up his items. "That boy of yours is something special, William." Sarah would be proud. At the mention of his late wife, the ache in William's chest flared, but he managed a nod. "Hope so." Stepping into the crisp October air, William almost missed them, a woman and 3 children huddled against the building's brick wall. The woman's clothes were clean but worn, her face pale and tight with fear. Her children clung to her sides, their faces thin and anxious. William could have kept walking. His own burdens were heavy enough. But the youngest child looked up at him, his blue eyes hollow with hunger, and William's heart cracked open. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked carefully. She stiffened, shielding her kids. "We're fine." The lie was obvious. William caught the tremble in her hands and the slight flinch when he stepped closer. Pride fought neat on her face. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked gently. "We had? Yesterday," she mumbled, voice cracking. "Decision made." William gestured up the road. "My house is that way. Got soup on the stove. Fresh bread, too. You're welcome to join us." Suspicion flashed across her face. Strangers didn't offer kindness for nothing. But her children looked up at her, hope flickering across their faces, and something in her cracked. She extended her hand. "I'm Elizabeth. These are my kids, Emma, Alice, and Matthew." "William. Nice to meet y'all," he said, smiling. "Let's get you fed." William's house was small but sturdy, tucked between maple trees shedding gold leaves. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and fresh bread. Within minutes, 5 steaming bowls of soup were on the old oak table. The children devoured the food with abandon. William sliced more bread as he watched them. Elizabeth dabbed at her eyes, overwhelmed not just by the meal but by the simple dignity of it. Jackson returned from school and, after a moment of hesitation, welcomed the newcomers with easy kindness. "My dad makes the best bread," he bragged. "Grandma taught him." William winked at the kids. Family secret. For the first time in days, Elizabeth's children laughed. After dinner, Jackson dragged them to his room to show off his battered toy collection, leaving William and Elizabeth alone with mugs of tea between them. "Thank you," Elizabeth said, voice trembling. "No need," William replied. She studied him, weighing trust against fear. Finally, she spoke. "We left 3 nights ago. My husband, he's not who everyone thinks." She described a life of fear hidden beneath a facade of wealth and success. A husband revered in public, monstrous in private. When he threatened the children, she knew she had to flee. William listened quietly, but at the name, Richard Reynolds, he stiffened. "You know him?" Elizabeth asked. William nodded grimly. Years ago, he'd worked for Reynolds. When William refused to sign off on unsafe factory conditions, Reynolds had him blacklisted. He lost his career, his savings, nearly his home. "That sounds like him," Elizabeth whispered, horror in her voice. Their shared history bound them instantly. Fate had spun them together, victims of the same man. Days passed, weaving Elizabeth and her children deeper into William's life. Jackson welcomed the chaos of siblings, and Elizabeth, despite her exhaustion, began to bloom. She helped William with his carpentry work, revealing a sharp eye for design. At night, when the children were asleep, they sat on the porch talking about grief, fear, resilience. Elizabeth confessed that her children still flinched at raised voices, that laughter had been a punishable offense in her old life. "You're safe now," William promised, but safety was temporary. Richard Reynolds would come looking, and sure enough, a black sedan began prowling the edges of town. Sheriff Davis confirmed the worst. A private investigator had been asking about Elizabeth and her children. William and Elizabeth made plans. Emergency bags were packed, escape routes memorized. The children learned secret passwords, disguised as games. But despite the growing fear, life flourished. Elizabeth's sketches turned into commissions. William's modest carpentry shop became a full-fledged business. "Crafted with love," they called it. The town embraced them. Still, the storm brewed closer. One rainy night, a fire broke out. The workshop William and Elizabeth had built together was engulfed in flames. It was no accident. Accelerant had been used. William risked everything, running back into the smoke to save the children one by one. He barely made it out himself, collapsing in the mud as the propane tanks exploded behind him. The house was lost. But all the children lived. In the hospital, wrapped in bandages, William woke to Elizabeth's tear-streaked face. "You saved them," she whispered. "You saved us." When Sheriff Davis found evidence linking the arson to men hired by Richard Reynolds, the town rallied. Families brought food, clothes, even furniture. An emergency shelter opened. Deputies stood guard at the hospital. Reynolds appeared in town a week later with lawyers and threats. He offered Elizabeth a settlement, custody of the children in exchange for exile. Money, a new house, security far from William. Elizabeth considered. Fear whispered she should accept. But when she looked at William, scarred and weary but still standing, she found her answer. She chose to stay. They fought in court. Witnesses testified. Teachers, neighbors, doctors. The town stood as one. Richard's polished lies crumbled under the weight of truth. Facing public scandal, he backed down. Elizabeth retained custody. William was cleared of all accusations. Rebuilding began. The town organized a new kind of barn raising, not for a barn, but for a home. Volunteers poured in. Carpenters, plumbers, electricians, old women with casseroles. Children carried tools. Elders supervised from rocking chairs. William and Elizabeth worked side by side, designing a house big enough for all of them. Stronger. Better. During the cornerstone ceremony, they buried a small box. Inside it, wooden hearts William had carved, each bearing their names. Jackson, Emma, Alice, Matthew, William, and Elizabeth. Roots for a new life. A year later, the Patterson house stood proudly under the warm spring sun. The promised tree, planted from a sapling in the ashes of the old home, stretched green leaves toward the sky. Inside, the house buzzed with excitement. Friends gathered. Mayor Thompson, Sheriff Davis, the Graysons, Coach Miller, all the people who had carried them through the fire and beyond. William and Elizabeth stood together, their children surrounding them. 1 year ago, we lost everything, William said. But today, we stand together. Stronger. Wiser. A family. Elizabeth added, not by blood, but by choice. They announced their engagement to cheers and applause. Jackson presented a handmade sign. Family isn't where you come from. It's who you come home to. Outside, the promised tree fluttered in the breeze. The laughter of children drifted through the air. They had survived the fire, survived Richard Reynolds' rage. Now, they were building something even stronger, a home made not of timber and nails, but of love, hope, and a future chosen freely. And for William Patterson, Elizabeth Reynolds, Jackson, Emma, Alice, and Matthew, the greatest masterpiece would always be the family they built together. Not perfect, not without scars, but absolutely, beautifully theirs.